Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the R&B Show. My name is Bruce Cologne. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Really appreciate it. So it's been a minute, I know, but we are back, and we are back to cover someone that I've been meaning to on this channel for quite some time. Easily one of my all-time favorite singer, songwriter, musicians, and that is the legend, Sting. Now, those of you who are longtime viewers of the channel might remember that I have briefly covered the Police in a previous video reviewing their re-edited, restored, remastered version of their Police Around the World documentary. But I have not covered this group nearly enough in relation to my fanaticism for them, that's for sure. Easily one of my all-time favorite groups, and for the Police, it actually happens to be a banner year in that their most celebrated album, Synchronicity, turns 40 years old this summer. Now, why the long sigh, you might ask? Well, that is because, yes, I was there to experience the Summer of Synchronicity in real time. As a matter of fact, the Synchronicity Tour was my very first concert-going experience as a very young teen, and it's unbelievable now for me to look back and think that I got to experience that show as the first of my live concert-going experiences. Not only that, but it was the tour opener at the old Comiskey Park in Chicago. Great memories. So what I'm hoping to do in the coming months, a little closer to the original release date of the Synchronicity album, is make a video covering my memories of the album, the tour, all things Police related, but also I hope to participate in a live stream with my good buddy, Michael Noland of the awesome channel, The Bottom Line. Those of you who haven't had a chance to check that out, please do yourselves a favor and get around to it. Michael is a huge fan of the Police, so we're going to be discussing all things in relation to this album, our memories of the Police. It's going to be a phenomenal discussion, and that should be dropping probably around June or so. But I thought, rather than wait all this time to get around to that, why not start the Police-related celebrations a bit early by extolling the virtues of their leader and dare to ask the question, is Sting an underrated genius? Now, I know for many of you, this is going to be a ludicrous question to dare to ask, especially if someone who is probably one of classic rock's most celebrated, successful artists. This is someone with a boatload of Grammys, one of the most recognized standards to his name with Every Breath You Take, and also someone who recently made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars off of his publishing catalog. I most definitely would never have asked this question in the early 80s during the height of Police Mania, where Sting and Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland were without question the most famous and successful pop group at the time. But times do change, and people do forget. And Sting is one of these figures for me that, like a Paul McCartney and a Prince, is so gifted in so many areas and makes it all look so effortless. Not only that, but he's also been around long enough as one of our veteran artists that it's kind of easy to overlook how brilliant he is. I think most of us know he's great, but do we know how great, really? So what I want to do today is look at a few of his early solo albums, share my personal memories of them, and hopefully in the future we can pick up that thread and then go back and discuss some of the later albums in his solo catalog as well. But I did want to provide a little context first, and I do have a few bullet points that I'll be referring to throughout. Let's just dive right in. So I would say from around the time of Ghost in the Machine and Sting's starring role in the dark British thriller Brimstone and Treacle, which I have the soundtrack for right there, there were always rumors about Sting going solo. He was earmarked by the press and by rock fans for superstardom. And eventually, after conquering the world with the Police, the band did something truly unique in rock, and that was quit while at the very top of their game. Now, I know it can also be said that both the Beatles and Led Zeppelin did that as well, but in the case of those groups, it was really more business woes and personal tragedy that ended their reigns of supremacy. In the case of the Police, they arrived at this conclusion more voluntarily, I would say. They were smart enough to see that there was no topping a simultaneous #1 song #1 album, headlining Shea Stadium at a time when probably less than a handful of artists had done so. They achieved all of this in 1983. This was when their critical and public acclaim was at an all-time high, and they knew that there was no way to better all of that. All they could really continue to do was repeat that cycle. So Sting decided to forge his own path starting in 1985 with this album, The Dream of the Blue Turtles. It was always a album title that rolled quite easily off the tongue, did it not? So in retrospect, I do have to give Sting a lot of credit. Not only did it take courage to leave the safety net of the biggest band in the world at the time, but he also went in a different musical direction. And, there were no guarantees that it would work. While the Police are still considered one of our all-time great power trios in rock history, Sting went almost full circle back to his original musical roots, hiring some of the best jazz musicians around, and really stretching out as a composer and band leader. Now, of course, there were some casualties to this approach, namely the punchy power pop sound that we were all familiar with and loved so much. He also abdicated bass duties to Daryl Jones, who has since gone on to become the bass player for the Rolling Stones. But this is a very, very sophisticated, high-class album with many, many great songs. There were the hits. If you love Somebody Set Them Free, the reggae-tinged Love is the Seventh Wave, the still sadly relevant Russians, my personal favorite, Fortress Around Your Heart. But there were also a lot of really cool deep cuts, such as We Work the Black Seam, Children's Crusade, and Moon Over Bourbon Street. It was a real shift in style that at first I was mixed on, although it eventually did grow on me, and I would say that this album overall has aged very well. So he followed that album up in 1987 with Nothing Like the Sun. And for me, this is still probably my favorite of his solo albums. I think one of his greatest artistic triumphs as well. Now, this was originally issued on double vinyl, I remember that, and the album did retain a similar approach to The Dream of the Blue Turtles, yet the songs here were even better, in my opinion. They were inspired by the death of his mother at the time, and there is something both somber and stirring about these tracks. The production is sleek, it's expensive, it's polished to a very, very high sheen, and again, there's an elegance to the arrangements. And also, Sting reaching new heights as a writer in songs like Fragile, They Dance Alone. So many great songs on here. The Lazarus Heart, Sister Moon, Be Still My Beating Heart, and an amazing, amazing cover of Jimi Hendrix's Little Wing. Just a great, great album for me from beginning to end. So after that album and the accompanying world tour that followed, there was a long gap, probably the longest gap of Sting's recording career up to that point, before we got yet another shift from him with 1991's The Soul Cages. Now, the reason for the delay was that Sting's father passed away in 1987, probably around 5 months after he lost his mother. So Sting was suffering writer's block for years, and he was able to deal finally with the death of his father through his music. This resulted in what I think is a quite elegiac concept album that dealt with childhood memories, father-son relationships, the desire for escape, the pain of loss, and possibly redemption as well. It's all very weighty stuff that would eventually form the basis for his musical The Last Ship many years later. There was one musically upbeat song, and that was the first single, All This Time. But I would say that the rest of the music was largely meditative, really, with my personal favorites being Why Should I Cry For You and When the Angels Fall. Really love that track. Sting has since gone on record to call it his most misunderstood album. I think a lot of that has more to do with it possibly being the least commercially impactful of his solo albums up to that point. But it also did mark a key turning point in his career. So for the accompanying tour, what Sting did was he stripped things back to a four-piece rock ensemble with the great Dominic Miller on guitar, Vinnie Colaiuta on drums, and David Sancious on keyboards and occasional guitar. And Sting himself was back to bass long before the tour of the same name. This was a tight, killer group of musicians. And I would say that while the new live arrangements were not a total departure from the jazz fusion style of his early solo work, there was more of a balance with some uncluttered rock playing, and finally a new guitarist in Miller who would prove to be a key musical collaborator moving forward. And all of this would pay big, big dividends on Sting's next studio album, but that is a story for another day. So anyway, if you enjoyed today's video, please take a moment to give us a thumbs up, as that always helps with channel growth and recognition and the unknowable beast that is the YouTube algorithms. And please, for all my fellow Sting Police fans, let me know your thoughts on favorite songs, albums, tours, etc. What are your favorite memories associated with Sting? And even though we all know how brilliant he is, those of us who are fans, would you say he's still somewhat underrated in the current scholarship of rock history? Let me know in the comments. I really look forward to hearing from all of you. I do hope to be back in the near future with a video covering the Phil Collins era of Genesis. But until then, everyone, please take care, stay safe, and we'll be seeing all of you again very, very soon, okay? Peace.